Uh, Hello and welcome everyone to our Election Outlook webinar today. I'm Kathy Foster, VP of Global Government Relations and Policy here at eBay, and I'd like to thank you for joining us to learn more about the upcoming US election. We are fortunate to have Jim Ellis as our guest speaker today. Jim is the creator of the Ellis Insight publication and the senior political analyst for the Business Industry Political Action Committee, known as BIPAC. He analyzes electoral politics, reports on trends, characteristics, and tendencies in American elections for political action committees, associations, and legislative advocacy firms. Jim speaks regularly around the country on electoral politics, previously appeared as a debate participant in the CBS affiliate in Washington, D.C.'s morning news program, and as a regular on the Sunday Morning Newsmakers with Larry Marino radio show on KRLA in Los Angeles. He's been interviewed on many national and local radio programs. Jim's originally from California, and he remains a diehard 49ers fan. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Jim.
Thank you, Kathy. It's great to be with you and everyone at the wonderful eBay company, and I appreciate so much the opportunity to address you today to talk about the final few days of this election and what we can expect, not only in the last week, a couple of weeks here as we hit the November 3rd election, but what we can think about or look for rather in terms of seeing how it all comes out. And there's a really good chance that this election does not end on November 3rd. And I'll show you why as we go through this presentation. It could be a couple of weeks before we know a winner of the presidential race, and almost certainly so in some key Senate races and the U.S. House, which are all very important in terms of where the country will go after this election. Right now, I'm going to share my screen with you. I have a slide presentation so we can go through the entire country and explain just exactly where the candidates are and what each presidential candidate here at the beginning has to do to win this race. And we'll start with President Trump first, and then we'll go to Joe Biden. And when you watch the news and you see these reports about the map and what states are going to be important, they invariably talk about the Great Lakes states. And by that, I mean Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And that is true that one of those is going to be determinative of the election. But I think the 5 states you're looking at right now are actually more important. These 5 in color: Arizona, Texas, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina. They constitute President Trump's core 5. And it is a fact that Mr. Trump will have to win all of these states, just as he did in 2016, and really just as any Republican nominee must, to win the national election. They must carry all 5 of these states. If they don't, or if Joe Biden in this case breaks through and takes one of them, any one of them, he's going to win the national election. And that's how important this core 5 truly is to the outcome of the national campaign. And let's take a look at them one by one. Well, why are Florida and North Carolina purple in this map? And they're purple because they're always swing states. And if you look at the Florida and North Carolina votes throughout the recent electoral history, we'll find that both parties can win statewide elections in those states. Now, Republicans tend to win a few more than Democrats, but Democrats are very much alive in every election. But for a Republican candidate for president in the modern era, they must win North Carolina and Florida because the Republicans simply don't take enough big states. And they can't lose these 2 in Texas together to make up those electoral votes. There's just nowhere else for them to go on the map if they were to lose those states. Now, any Democratic candidate, Joe Biden included, begins the campaign with 98 electoral votes of the 270 they need right in their pockets. And that's because you've got California, New York, and New Jersey all coming to the Democratic nominee with really no effort. The Republicans concede those states. And so the Democratic nominee starts out 98-0 ahead in the Electoral College. And that underscores why these 5 states are so important, because they are a little bit larger in the Republican coalition. And without them, they simply can't get to the 270 mark to win the election. That's why they're critical. So we start with Florida, we start with North Carolina, those 2 purple, swing states, but they must go Republican, and they have in the past elections. And we'll talk about the polling in these places here in a second, but you'll see some interesting little side stories on those states. But then we look at these red states with the blue stripes. Now, why is that? Georgia, Texas, and Arizona. Well, these are previously lock-solid Republican states that were akin to California, New York, and New Jersey for the Democrats, but they aren't anymore. And so the Republicans would counteract that 98-0 lead with wins in Georgia, Texas, and Arizona, almost the same way without much competition. That's changed. That's changed. So these states now are moving to the political center, and they still will vote for more Democrats than, still vote for more Republicans than Democrats, but the Democrats are still very much alive. And we now have competition in these states versus when before they were gimmies for Republicans, no longer. So that's, again, why these 5 are so important to the outcome of this election. So right now, let's take a look at exactly where we are in these 5 states in the polling. And we'll take a look at the last 5 polling trend. And these numbers are changing quickly, but this is a good example as to where we are. So the last 5 would show Joe Biden ahead by 3 points on average in Arizona. Now that's critically important. And Arizona, of these 5, may be the most important because you see some fundamental political and demographic change going on in that state. It is no longer the rock-solid Republican bastion that it used to be. And this time, we may see Biden breaking through to win. If he does, and this is his best chance of the 5, then he's going to win the national election. So if we move on to that, we look at Texas. Trump average up 2.5. That's lower than he should be, but there's, as you'll see, there's an underpoll in the South, and that lead is probably a little bit larger than 2.5 points. But he's leading there, up 1 in Georgia. Same story there. It's probably a point or 2 better than that, actually, because of the underpoll among Republicans. He's down by 1, or Biden rather leads by 1 in Florida and 2 in North Carolina. So this sets up right now, it looks like it's a bad cut for President Trump, and it looks like Biden wins the election. Well, let's compare with where we were in early October or early to mid-October of 2016. Well, the 2 candidates were even in Arizona. Texas was not even polled because it was viewed to be so rock-solid Republican, they didn't even poll it. And so there isn't any data from 2016 to compare the numbers that we're seeing today. Trump was ahead by 4 points in Georgia. He was down by 4 in Florida and down by 3 in North Carolina. And remember now, at the end of the election, he ends up winning all of these 5 because that's the only way he could win the national election. So he wins all these 5, even though we had these numbers in early to mid-October. Now let's take a look at where we are today versus 2016. Okay, Arizona, again, sticking out as the problem for Trump because Biden has gained 3 points over what Hillary Clinton was doing in 2016, and now he leads there. So Trump has to reverse Arizona or he loses. Again, we can't compare because there were no 2016 polls in Texas. But in Georgia is similar to Arizona in the fact that though Trump leads by a little bit, his margin isn't as strong. And Biden has actually picked up about 3 points on average over where Hillary Clinton finished in Georgia back in 2016. The state's changing there too, just in the last 4 years. But Trump, even though he's trailing, according to polling in North Carolina and in Florida, he's 1 point better at this point in time than he was in 2016 in North Carolina, and 3 points better than he was in Florida at this point. And remember, he would rebound to win all of these states. So this is step number 1 for Trump to be able to win a national election. He must have all 5 of these states, and we'll see how he's shaping up then in the rest of the map. This map maintains that Trump, in fact, does win the core 5 states. And in fact, again, and I reiterate, if Biden is to win any one of those, if he picks up Arizona or if he picks up Georgia, he's going to win the national election. I mean, that's how important those states are. So now we spin to the more northern part of the country. So why are Nebraska and Maine in purple in this map? They're not swing states. So why are they in purple? They're in purple in this case because they are the only 2 states that split their electoral votes. Now, any state could do that, but they're the only 2 that really do. And that is, in Maine and Nebraska, you win 2 points for winning the statewide count and 1 each for every congressional district that you carry. Maine has 2 districts, Nebraska has 3. That has come into play twice in the modern era because in 2008, President Obama, he was then Senator Obama at the time in 2008, won the 2nd District of Nebraska, which is the Omaha metropolitan area. In 2016, President Trump, then candidate Donald Trump, won the Northern District of Maine, gave him an extra electoral vote. Now, these 2 districts are really important from the standpoint that if they go opposite of their statewide vote, then they could set up a tie. And that's why they're important. Because with how the other states may fall, if Nebraska 2 doesn't go for Trump and Maine 2 doesn't go for Trump, you could see a 269 to 269 tie. And what happens then? If the Electoral College is tied or no one reaches 270 in the Electoral College, it then goes to the House of Representatives to decide. And it's the new House, the House that will be elected in November, that will elect the president in the case of a tie or in the case that one candidate doesn't reach 270 electoral votes. So what happens in the House then? You say, well, the Democrats have a majority in the House and they're likely to keep it, if not improve it. So, that would be an easy win for Biden. No, it isn't. It's because the vote for president in the House of Representatives is different than every other vote because the members themselves do not have his or her own vote. Each state has 1 vote. So California, with its 53 members, has 1 vote. And the at-large states like Alaska and Montana and the Dakotas and Wyoming, Vermont and Delaware, all of those have 1 congressman. They get 1 vote too. So the Electoral College and the vote for president in the House of Representatives skews to the smaller states and the metro or the small rural areas. And that's done on purpose. It was done on purpose as conceived by the founding fathers to make sure that the small states and the rural areas have a voice in the national election, because even at that time, some 240 years ago, they could see that the cities would outpace in terms of population the rural areas. And they wanted to make sure that the cities and the population centers did not dominate a national election. So they created the Electoral College and the system to break a tie in the House of Representatives with a different vote than any other vote in the House to protect the small states and the rural areas. So this was done on purpose. And whether you agree with that or not, and a lot of people obviously don't, the system actually has worked exactly as it was designed. And the 2016 example is perfect for this because they created the Electoral College to prevent what might have happened in 2016. Because if you take Los Angeles and New York City out of Hillary Clinton's vote, Trump wins the popular vote. And that's why they created the Electoral College, to make sure that every place in the country had some say in the national election. And that's why things exist the way they do. Now let's get back to the map and see what else Trump has to do, because even if he wins his core 5 and he holds those 2 congressional districts in Nebraska and in Maine, he's not done. What else does he have to do? So we come back to the Great Lakes states that gets the most attention at this point in this presidential election: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. So how many then of these gold states does Trump need to win? And the answer is just 1. Any one of those 4 states, and remember, he won 3 of the 4 last time by small margins, but he won them: Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Now all he has to do is win 1. And that's why, again, we come back to these southern tier 5 states that set up the rest of the map. And that's why they're so important, because they make that map easier for Trump should he win all 5 of those states and keep all of his red states intact, as Biden will keep all of the blue. So at this point, then, let's talk about, well, what does Joe Biden have to do then to win if Trump keeps his 5 core states? Now, remember, we've said several times that if Biden cracks through in any of those 5 southern states, Arizona being the most likely, that he wins the national election. So in this example, we'll say he doesn't. So how does he can still win? So how does he do that? We'll go up to Maine. Maine, again, important state in this election. It's only 1.3 million people. It has 2 congressional districts, way in the northeast corner of the country. But it's a very important state in this election for the presidential election and for the U.S. Senate. And we'll see why in a few minutes on the Senate. But for the presidency, because they split their electoral votes, they have a special status. Now, again, any state can do that, but Nebraska and Maine are the only 2 that choose to do it. And so they split their 2 votes. Everybody else is winner take all. So they split their 2 votes in the following order. So if you win the statewide count, then you get 2 electoral votes, and then 1 each for their 2 districts. Well, if in this case, as was the case in 2016, Hillary Clinton that year won the 1st district by more than Donald Trump won the 2nd district, meaning that she got the extra 2 votes and took 3 of Maine's 4 votes. Biden must do that. If Trump wins those 5 core states and keeps all of his coalition of red together, then Biden must take 3 votes out of Maine. That means he has to win the 1st district, the southern seat, by more than Trump wins the 2nd district, which is the northern seat. Now, he probably does that. Polling suggests that he will do that, but he must. That's the caveat. He must, or he doesn't make it. So Maine becomes very important. Then we go back to these Great Lakes states. This time they're in green: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. In this example, then, how many states of these 4 does Biden need to win? And the answer is all of them. And so because Trump carries his 5 core states in the southern sector, Arizona, Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, Biden has no margin for error. The map then favors Trump, and Biden can't make a mistake or can't come in with a lower than expected vote in any of these spaces, in any of these places, rather. Otherwise, he loses the national election. So this is very much alive, even though the national polls are clear that Biden is going to win the popular vote. It's not decided on the popular vote. It's decided on these state votes and how they break down. So let's see how these Great Lakes states are breaking down right now. And you see right now it's blue across the board. In the most recent polls, the average, Joe Biden has a 6-point lead in Minnesota, 7 points in Wisconsin and Michigan, and 5 points in Pennsylvania. So it looks like he is going to sweep them, and that would elect him. Again, let's go back and do our other exercise where we compare them to early and mid-October. And we see at that point in time, Hillary Clinton's lead was 6 in Minnesota and in Wisconsin, 11 in Michigan, and 8 in Pennsylvania. So how does that compare to today? Well, if you look at her standing versus his in 2016 versus now, that Trump is actually today exactly where he was 4 years ago in Minnesota. Now, he lost Minnesota. He lost that to Clinton by 1.5 points, but that was significant because Minnesota is the most loyal state to the Democrats in the presidential election. They have not voted for a Republican since Richard Nixon in 1972. That's the last time Minnesota went Republican, and every state in the union has voted for a Republican since that time at least once. So that's how loyal Minnesota is to the Democrats. But could Trump break through? He only lost by 1.5 points last time. So that poll collapsed by about 5 points in the last election, 4.5, that led him to a 1.5 point loss. And they're going after Minnesota. Lots of things are happening there. As you know, we've got a lot of unrest there with the George Floyd tragedy. We have a changing of the guard, if you will, in the northern part of the state and the southern part. And we also see the suburbs. What will happen to them? How do they react to some of the violence that's gone on in Minneapolis? That's an open question. And that's why Trump views that they have a chance to win that. But right now, he's running 6 points down, which is exactly where he was at this point in time in 2016. In Wisconsin, Biden is actually 1 point better off than Hillary Clinton. Remember, Trump would rebound to win that state, even though none of the 33 polls that were taken in Wisconsin during the 2016 cycle showed him leading. None of them. Yet he won. Not by much, but he won. Now let's look at Michigan and Pennsylvania. Though he's behind, as we saw from the other chart, we see, though, that his position is improved then versus now by 4 points in Michigan and 3 points in Pennsylvania. And remember, he rebounded to win both those states by a small margin, but he did win them. And that's what we're looking at again. Can he do that this time again? Because the polling suggests that he's in a similar position this time than he was last time. And there was always a path for Trump to win that last election, obviously, since he did. But it was always that these states, it all had to fall his way at the end, and it did. Now the question, will it this time? I think it's much harder for him this time. This is a different race against Joe Biden than it was against Hillary Clinton. And I think for 4 reasons. Number one, COVID. COVID has really wreaked havoc on Trump's campaign for 2 reasons mainly. Number one is it's robbed him of his key issue, his top reelection reason, which is the roaring economy that was present right before COVID. Well, the economy shuts down for 3 months. Of course, it's going to go down. But that doesn't matter. Now his response has to be, I can rebuild it better than Biden versus we can continue this roaring economy. It changes his whole campaign, and it's been a big negative. Secondly, it kept him off the campaign trail. And that was a huge plus for him back in 2016 when he was doing rallies all the time, all around the country, huge rallies that were able to generate enthusiasm. It pumped him up like no tomorrow. And he hasn't had that until now, where he's reverting to going back to doing the rallies, which is a big part of his campaign. Point 3 is, frankly, I think his campaign is weaker this time. Last time in 2016, his message was strong. It was disciplined. This time, not so. So you have a situation where his message is disparate, not as clear, not as concise, and it's not as disciplined in terms of the repetition. Another reason is one of the key constituencies he had last time was a 65-year and older. Right now, his numbers are worse among that coalition, and they're worse among white women, a category in which he carried. And interestingly, he's up a little bit with the minority community. But it's not enough to offset him dropping with the 65 and older. That's his number one problem. That explains Arizona to a large degree. And he must rebound if he is to win within that category. And finally, the other problem he's got, he being President Trump, is Joe Biden's negatives just aren't what Hillary Clinton's negatives were. If you remember, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were both what we call in the polling world underwater, meaning their negatives were higher than their positives. President Trump's clearly are higher today, his negatives, than his positives. But that's not the case with Biden. Fox News poll just did a recent, very exhaustive survey, and they found that Biden's positive to negative ratio was 51 to 44. Well, 44 is a pretty high negative, but it isn't what it was for Clinton because the Biden negative appears to be more partisan than Hillary's was. Hillary Clinton's negatives were personal, and they were steadfast negatives. So that's a tougher road for Trump because Biden is not the type of figure that Hillary Clinton was. And all those combined, those reasons, lead us to believe that this is a harder road for everything to fall Trump's way the way it did back in 2016. But it's still possible that it does. And he is still set up, and as you can see on this map, he's set up a little bit better in 2020 than he was in 2016 to see if he can make that transition. We'll find out soon enough. The 2 candidates, I have also several states to watch. We've got Iowa and Ohio that must remain with Trump. If he's to win, those states are always competitive. Ohio in particular was a swing state until recently. And really, it's really moved more towards the Republicans come 2018 even, when they won the governor's race by 5 points, when they thought, the pollsters thought they were going to lose it by 5. And that tells you that the state's moving more to the right. But he must hold those 2 states. Biden must hold Nevada, which now there's a 2-point poll there. But Nevada, and I always think Nevada is a teaser for the Republicans. You can get to 49, but they can't get to 50. I think that still happens, but it's still one that Biden has to watch. And also New Hampshire, which is the most politically schizophrenic state in the country because they go from sweeping out all the Republicans one year and sweeping out all the Democrats the next year. And they've done that consistently since the turn of the century. In fact, in that first district, and New Hampshire, like Maine, has 2 districts. The Eastern District, has defeated more incumbent congressmen than any district in the United States since the turn of the century. And since 2008 was the last time it elected an incumbent, to re-elect an incumbent in a House where over 90% of the incumbents win re-election. So it's an interesting phenomenon in New Hampshire, and that puts it in play. Biden must win New Hampshire. If Trump breaks through and takes those 4 electoral votes, that could change the national picture. He only lost it by 2,700 votes last time, so they do have to pay attention. So as we wrap up this presidential race, right now, it looks like Joe Biden is headed to a win, but as you can see from the state count, which is all important, and the national popular vote is not, we see that there is a chance that Trump could rebound with a combination of underpolling for Republicans, which is pretty common and very common in the South. And it's going to be at least 2 or 3 points that you can add to Trump's column right now. And if he can create the proper image here as people are going to the polls to swing back some of these swing states in the Great Lakes to him, and he only has to do that in 1 this time to pull off the election. So we're still not done with this presidential election. It is still up in the air. So with that, let's move on to the U.S. Senate, which is very, very important. Now, the Senate is broken down as 53 Republicans and 47 Democrats. And this is the target map that you're looking at right now. And we see that there are 35 Senate seats up in this election. As you know, senators have 6-year terms, and 1/3 of the Senate comes up every 2 years. This time we have 2 extra seats because we've got a special election in Arizona for the final 2 years of the late John McCain's last term, and in Georgia. And that's why you have a number 2 in the state of Georgia, because both Senate seats are on the ballot. And Senator Johnny Isakson resigned at the end of 2019 due to health reasons. And now his appointed replacement, Kelly Loeffler, must run to fill the balance of that term, which is also 2 years. So that is a different type of election, which I'll explain in a few moments. It's different than all the others that you're seeing. So what does this map mean? Well, the red seats are the seats that the Republicans currently have that Democrats are making a play for or challenging. The blue states are Democrat incumbent seats the Republicans are going after. And the white states are Republican seats that are currently in play that I think come off the board by the time we hit the election. Kentucky with Mitch McConnell, the open seat in Kansas, and Senator John Cornyn in Texas. So I think at the end of the day, you see those last 3 in white turning towards the Republicans. And now if we look at what I would call the realistic firewall for the Republican majority, again, it's 53 to 47. Now you notice on the last map that the state of Alabama was blue. That means it's a Democrat seat. Yet I've got it as a realistic part of the Republican firewall. Why is that? Alabama is a strong Republican seat. However, Senator Doug Jones won this in a special election in 2017 to replace Jeff Sessions when he became the Attorney General. And there was a big brouhaha in the state, and it all worked to Jones' benefit, and he wins the Senate race. But he now has to come up for a full 6-year term. So why is this seat red? Well, right now, Senator Jones is running behind double digits against Tommy Tuberville, the Republican nominee. Those of you who are college football fans probably know that name. He was the head coach of the University of Auburn, also Texas Tech University and the University of Cincinnati, after starting his career at the University of Mississippi. So he is a very well-known name in the South. He's very well-known in Alabama as the football coach, and he romps to a Republican win in the primary. So now he's up against Jones and leading by over 50% and more than 10 points, a double-digit lead. And furthermore, and this is where I think the Supreme Court opening really hurts somebody, and that really hurts Doug Jones, because in his career in the Senate, he's voted against Justice Kavanaugh. He voted for the Trump impeachment, neither of which were popular positions in Alabama. And now he'll vote against Amy Coney Barrett as well. And that doesn't sit well with the electorate there, who would absolutely go the other way. This will be a top 3 state for Trump. It would be very difficult for him to overcome that turnout model that's going to give Trump a big win, especially when he votes against Barrett and he's sided with the New York Democrats, as they will say in Alabama, for these critical votes. And so, but for the Republicans to hold that majority, they have to win this seat. And it looks like they will, but they have to. So if they do, then what else do we have? So you see also in red are North Carolina, Maine, Iowa, and Montana. So those are all Republican incumbents running for re-election in competitive races. But the Republicans must win at least 3 of those extra 4. Otherwise, they lose the majority. And we look at Tom Tillis in North Carolina. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later when we end with the Democratic map. Susan Collins in Maine, she is in a tough race against Sarah Gideon. She's the state House Speaker of the Maine House of Representatives. Susan Collins is a 4-term senator. So she's been there since 1997, the beginning of 1997, which is a long time. And she's won 4 elections there. So she's not a pushover by any means to lose this race. I personally thought when she came out and said she would oppose the motion to proceed for the Senate on the Amy Coney Barrett confirmation vote, I was very surprised that she did that so quickly. And I thought that cost her seat because I felt the conservatives in that state would desert her for doing that and that she wouldn't pick up much between the center and the left. I may be wrong on that because since she did that, the polls have actually closed in her favor, and that's back to an even race. So it's very much up in the air right now. I still think at the end of the day, the Democrats are probably favored to win that, but that is a critical seat for both parties. Again, that small state of Maine playing a big role in the 2020 election. Then you have Joni Ernst in Iowa, Steve Daines in Montana. Both tough races, both tough opponents. They both have to hold. If they don't, Democrats win the majority. So that's the realistic firewall, I believe, for the Republicans. Again, they can lose 1 of those 5. Well, actually, they have to win Alabama and then lose 1 of the remaining 4. Now let's look at what the Democrats have to do. Okay, so they're the minority. What is their path to the majority? They're down 53-47. But again, and here's the reason that Alabama seat's so important. Because that moves the majority, if they lose that, from 53 to 54. So all of a sudden now the Democrats don't need 3 seats if Biden wins to win the majority. They need 4. And they don't need 4 seats if Trump is reelected. They need 5. That changes the picture drastically, that 1 seat. And I think the Alabama seat's the most important seat to determine the majority path. But let's say the Republicans do win, and we'll say they do take Kentucky and Kansas and Texas. Say I'm right about that. Alaska is now in play, but the close races of Alaska, Iowa, Montana, for sake of argument, we'll say go their way. The 45th seat then for the Democrats is Minnesota, which is now a competitive seat. Senator Tina Smith running for a full term. She was appointed and then elected for the balance of that term, which was 2 years. They had a vacancy with Al Franken resigning. So she must win. She must win this time. Probably does. Probably does. It is a little bit competitive, but she probably wins. And that, though, is just the 45th Democratic seat. So they move to Michigan. Michigan, the Republicans have a strong candidate there by the name of John James. He is a manufacturing company owner out of the Detroit area, retired Army Ranger, African-American Republican candidate, and somebody that the Republicans are very excited about in Michigan, and very, very competitive. Before COVID, that race was even to 1 2-point race. After COVID hit and the shutdown began, Senator Gary Peters, his opponent, the first-term senator, Democrat, he expanded his lead, and he was up by more than 10. But now the race is closed again. And we see that coming closer to the 1 to 2 points that we saw earlier in the year, and James has the momentum. So this is one to really watch. But the Democrats absolutely must win here, and that's their 46th seat. So then we go into where the Democrats can come up with Republicans. Well, you've got their top 2 targets, which are Arizona and Colorado. And these are races where they've been ahead for months in the polling. They're still competitive, and the Republican incumbents, Martha McSally in Arizona, Cory Gardner in Colorado, they could still pull a win. But right now, it looks like those Democratic candidates, Mark Kelly, the retired astronaut in Arizona, John Hickenlooper, the former governor and presidential candidate in Colorado, looks like they will win. So let's give those seats to the Democrats, and that becomes their 47th and 48th seat. So, but they're still not to 50. So how do they get there? Well, 49, we'd already talked about Susan Collins. They need to convert that, but that's only their 49th, assuming the rest of the map falls this way. And then we come down to these 3 purple states in the Southeast, North Carolina, South Carolina, and the 2 Georgias. North Carolina, I had in the Republican firewall category. That's not a good state if you're the Republicans to be in the Republican firewall, because North Carolina voters have rejected and defeated more U.S. senators than any state in the country. In fact, since 1974, there's only 2 senators who have been reelected, Jesse Helms and the current Senator Richard Burr. That's it. Everybody else has served 1 term, either because they were defeated, most of them, or because they didn't run again because they thought they would be defeated. That's what Tom Tillis faces this time, and possibly the Republicans in terms of holding the majority. So it's a tough state for any incumbent for either party. And Tillis, who defeated an incumbent in 2014, comes back to attempt to win re-election. It didn't look very good for him up until about 2 weeks ago. His opponent, Cal Cunningham, a former state senator, has been running ahead almost all race he's been ahead. But now it's come out that Cal Cunningham has a couple of extramarital affairs going on, and that is starting to take a toll on the race. And it's now come back to where Tillis is back in play and could possibly pull it out at the end. We'll see how that transpires here in the last few days and weeks of this race. But this is the important one, and it could come down to North Carolina at the end of the day. Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, he is a well-known name nationally, but he's not too popular back at home. And even though it's a Republican state, he's in a real dogfight against a fellow by the name of Jamie Harrison, who is the former chairman of the Democratic Party in South Carolina and an attorney. And he has raised an unbelievable $86 million at this point in time. And they will spend well over $100 million in an attempt to get to defeat Lindsey Graham. Now, I don't know if they do, but the polls are indicating it's even. Graham might be pulling away a little bit now, but that's one to watch. If Jamie Harrison wins in South Carolina, I don't see any way the Democrats don't hold the majority or win the majority, and the Republican majority will be gone at that point. So South Carolina, really important. Georgia, 2 seats. Senator David Perdue, first term, needs to win re-election. He's only a little bit ahead. That was where he was 6 years ago, and he won by about 6 points. I have a hunch that's going to fall his favor. The second one is the special election with Kelly Loeffler to replace Johnny Isakson. Here's where this is a different election. I mentioned this would be a different one. And in the primary, this is a jungle primary. Those of you who live in California know what that is, because that's where everybody's on the same ballot. And then if nobody gets 50% in this case, the top 2 advance to a runoff election. And this system is also used in Washington and where it was formed and created in Louisiana. So since it's a special election, this is only the primary and not the general election. So if the candidates there, you've got 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans running, including Loeffler, and the chances of anybody getting 50% are virtually nil. So we are going to have a runoff, and it could be any combination of those 5 candidates. So you could have 2 Democrats, you could have 2 Republicans, most likely you have 1 of each, advancing to the runoff, which will be January the 5th. So if the Senate majority comes down to that last 1 seat in Georgia, and it may, then we could very much see a majority not decided until next year in January, on January 5th. And that will be a real brouhaha if the Senate majority rides on that last special election. That's the Senate right now. I think it's very, very close. I can make an argument real easily to get each party to 49 seats. The question is, how do they get to 50? And it comes down to those last 2 seats, and there could be a different combination of where they are that could make it very, very interesting as to where this lands. So I think we're in for a very tough and tight Senate result as we approach Election Day. Let's look at the House real quick. This is a convoluted map, and I did this on purpose to get the House all on one page. Really what this means is we have a lot of House races that are competitive. Every state that's colored has a competitive House race, and the numbers there you see are the numbers they have. And it's over 70 in 33 states where we've got competitive House races. The blue states are the states where Republicans are after Democratic incumbents. The red states, probably more importantly, where Democrats are after Republican incumbents. And the more they win in that category, the Democrats, then they're going to lock their majority in. Right now, it's on paper, it's 17 seats, but in reality, it's 19. And I'll draw your attention back to North Carolina again. where you see a -2. And the reason there's a -2 in North Carolina is because the state Supreme Court has changed the map, the congressional map, for the 2020 election. And that's going to cost the Republicans 2 seats, one in Raleigh and one in Greensboro. So the real effective number for the Republican majority, the conversion number, is 19. Now, that's not particularly large, because if you look at history here, since 1994 inclusive, there have been 4 elections where the minority party, and we had one just in 2018, has gained more than 40 seats, not just 19, but more than 40. In 2010, it was 63 that the Republicans gained. So it's not out of the realm of total possibility that the Republicans couldn't pick up the majority, but I think and most everybody believes that the Democrats will hold the majority, and some think that it will be expanded upon. I'm not sure that's the case, but it could be. And there you look at those red states. Now, the lighter colored red and blues, they're lesser targets, but they're still competitive. The gold states are where both parties have seats in play, and both parties have to defend incumbents. If you look at Pennsylvania, for example, there's a blue 3 and a red 2. And that means the Democrats are protecting 3 competitive seats and the Republicans 2. And so you add this up, it's well over 70. Chances are we see a Democratic majority return, but there's one number I want you to keep in mind, and that number is 30. And there are 30 Democrats who sit in seats that President Trump won and is likely, in most cases, to win them again. And how does that affect that Democratic incumbent seeking re-election? Well, it makes it more difficult, frankly. It makes it more difficult for them to win in seats that Trump will take. That's the key number, 30. They only need 19. So it is, again, coming down to how many of the Trump district seats can the Republicans win, and how many other seats can the Democrats take away that the Republicans currently have. Those 2 questions will answer who wins the majority. It's very likely to be the Democrats. We'll see what type of number they have, but we're very likely to see a continuation of the Democratic majority in the House. I want to wrap up by talking about the change in voter procedures, and it's changed even since Friday. But right now, you see the vote by mail. That's a big topic of discussion, the absentee ballots. How are they going to count these? When are they going to count them? And this is what's probably going to prevent us from seeing a call in the presidential race in particular on election night. Because the time that the mail comes into these races, or to these states rather, and the time it takes to count, you know, from the California situation, sometimes it takes a month to count all those ballots. We will see potentially a change in what happens. And this could cause us great problems, I think, and this is going to be the reason. So you look at this map and you see all these gray states. They've all expanded their mail voting in terms of absentee ballots. So more people can vote by mail in all the gray states. The blue states really haven't. Now, Texas did, but it was thrown out in court. So these blue states are going to vote as they always have. No changes in the state law in those blue states. The red states are going a step further. And what they're doing is they're mailing ballots, live ballots, not absentee ballot application forms, but live ballots to every voter, active and inactive. An inactive voter is a person who hasn't voted in consecutive elections, and each state has a different number. But they're mailing to everyone just a live ballot. And that's where we could open up some problems. It's not really going to affect the presidential race too much because most of those states, maybe Nevada's in play, but the rest of them are not, one way or another, actually all going to the Democrats. But in the House and Senate, we could see some problems here, challenges and counter challenges based on some of these mail ballots coming in. So I think we could be set up for some bad situations here post-election. These are the states, and I think this is the critical problem here, that the states allowing post-election ballots. What's that mean? They're going to count ballots that come in after the election. Now, under the guise that the ballot is postmarked that day. But the post office themselves says on metered mail, mail with indicia, there's various categories of mail. Most of the time, the ballots fit those categories that don't get postmarked. So the argument that, well, you can just look at the postmark and then reject anything that's postmarked after November 3rd, I think that's where we're going to run into a lot of problems. And these red states are the states where a lot of that's going to happen, and these blues as well. The red states are states that have expanded their post-election ballot reception period. And we'll talk about the ones that are in play and when that is in a second. The blue states have done something a little bit differently. In the blue states there, Utah, North Dakota, Ohio, you must actually have your ballot postmarked or in the mail by the 2nd of November, the day before the election, but it will be received afterwards. And we'll see what happens. But that's the difference with November 2nd versus November 3rd. The other states are postmarked November 3rd, if there is a postmark. So let's look at, I think, the critical slide here. These are the states that are in play. The battleground states: Nevada, Texas, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Iowa, and Minnesota. Those dates you see are the dates that is the new deadline for the ballots to come in. And again, they're supposed to be in the mail by November the 3rd, but I'm not sure there's going to be a definitive way of actually proving that. And that's what we're going to have a lot of fights about. Now, and most of these changes are due to court action and not legislatures or governors. And it is a COVID-related response. But a lot of these judges, and they've all have here, have ignored a system that works well. Oregon began mail voting, all mail voting, in 2000. So they've had 20 years of experience with mail voting. They require all the ballots in on election day. The other principal states that have gone to mail are Washington, Colorado, and California. Colorado and Oregon, you have to get the ballot in by election day. Washington and California, you do not. So there's a period of time. In fact, California now this time is going to be all the way to November 20th that they're going to be receiving ballots. So these other states, Texas is just one day, November 4th. Just 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, in North Carolina, a judge expanded that post-election ballot reception period from November 6th to November 12th. Pennsylvania instituted, the state Supreme Court changed all their laws. Not all of them, but most of them, most of the critical ones regarding mail voting. And this is going to be possibly the focal point if we're in a real close election for president. They don't have a Senate race, so it's not going to factor there. Because I think we're going to see a lot of the challenges in Pennsylvania, particularly some of the action that the state is taking. Now, the Secretary of State there has done something that no other place has done. And she has issued an edict to the county clerks that they are not allowed to verify a person's signature on the absentee ballot request or the absentee ballot envelope with their voter registration card. Now, it's unclear if she has that power to directly issue an edict to the county clerks, and that's being challenged. So we'll see how that plays out. But I think that's a dangerous situation because now you're going to have claims of an unverified election because of that. And look for Pennsylvania to play a major role if this election is real close, if it's not called. And I don't see how it is going to be called on election night because look at the states that will not have all their ballots in. Texas, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Minnesota, Iowa. They've all come up in our discussion. They're all battleground states. Now, if you don't have all the ballots in and a substantial number of absentee ballots outstanding, how are you going to get a call on election night? The answer is you're not. And so the question is, how long is it going to take? Well, these dates give us some clues. It could be a couple of weeks before we actually know what happens here in the presidential race and some of the Senate races. North Carolina Senate race is important. Minnesota, Iowa. Those are the Senate races to watch in these states. But I think these states are going to be the focal points. Michigan and Wisconsin were on this list too, but just on Friday, Michigan, which had a lower court ruling that said that the ballot extension period would be November 17th, they were going to go 2 full weeks. On Friday afternoon, the state appellate court in Michigan has reversed that, and they're back to the regular call of business, which means ballots in on election day. And you see this late in the cycle, you still have courts changing how the election is going to be run, and we may not be done with that. And again, I think this sets themselves up for some big challenges after the election if this election is contested and up in the air, where you have challenges on various votes versus counter challenges versus lawsuits counter lawsuits, I think it could be an ugly and unfortunate time for the country. But that's the way it's handled. They've seemed in these states, these judges have ignored the Oregon example, which again has worked well. And they have more experience than any other state in these types of elections, but they aren't paying much attention to that. Apparently the Michigan appellate court did. The Wisconsin appellate court did. Those two critical states are not in this when they were, in terms of the post-election ballot reception period. So my personal opinion, I think we may be headed for problems because of the situation they've created here. There's going to be a lot of doubt and a lot of problems, I think, unfortunately. That's not going to be good for everybody, for anybody rather. In conclusion, this election is not over. We are expecting a record voter turnout. In 2016, we had almost 137 million people vote in that election, which was an all-time high. Yet we're expected to break it this time. And we hope that everybody listening here does their part, casts their ballot. There may be over 150 million ballots cast this time. Some analysts believe it's going to be 155 million. That would shatter the previous records and be the most highly participated in presidential election of all time. And so that is a positive thing for America, that we have more participation, and I'm sure everyone will do their part. I again thank you for the opportunity of sharing some thoughts with you and running through the country to see where this election may end up in what has been a crazy, not only political year, but a crazy year for all of us in terms of the shutdowns that we've experienced through the pandemic. So I wish you the best. Thank you again. Thank you, Kathy and Jeff, for having me. And Jeff, I'll turn it back to you. So thanks again for your attention today.
Great. Thank you, Jim. That was really, really interesting. I love all of the data. And thank you, everybody that attended today. The government relations team here at eBay really appreciates it. A couple items to wrap up the call. So due to the amount of content we had and the number of attendees, we weren't able to do a live Q&A, but we do want your questions if you have them. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email us, the government relations team, at government_relations@ebay.com, and we'll get back to you in a timely manner. Also want to add, if you haven't yet voted, we have a great tool for you. We call it the Civic Action Tool. You can find it on our eBay Main Street site at ebaymainstreet.com/vote. And it's got all sorts of localized voting and candidate information. As Jim mentioned, some of the rules around voting in some places are still changing, and the tool is kept up to date to help out with that. And last but not least, a plug for our website, ebaymainstreet.com. If you're all interested on eBay's stance on e-commerce public policy, we encourage you to go to the website and join. There is a join button at the top. Click on that, give us your information, and we'll keep you in the loop. And with that, again, thank you very much for attending, and we're going to wrap up today's webinar. Hope everybody has a great day.